Once a titan of music, fashion, and culture, Sean Diddy Combs built an empire on charisma, ambition, and power. But in 2025, that empire teeters on the edge of collapse. Federal prosecutors have pulled back the velvet curtain to reveal a dark underworld of alleged coercion, trafficking, and abuse allegedly orchestrated by the mogul himself. The charges are absolutely staggering: sex trafficking, racketeering, and transporting individuals for prostitution. Testimony from former lovers, employees, and insiders paint a chilling portrait of freak-off parties and a lifestyle fueled by fear, control, and excess. Once revered as a cultural icon, Diddy now sits stone-faced in a New York courtroom as his past is dissected in brutal detail. With the public watching and his legacy on trial, the fall of Sean Combs is no longer just a scandal. It is a cultural reckoning. And the final verdict has yet to be written. Tonight, we are live from New York with all the latest from his trial as prosecutors present their closing argument in hopes of convincing the jury that Diddy was running a criminal enterprise. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. Great to have you aboard as another big trial draws to a conclusion here on your front row seat to justice. Of course, we're talking about Sean Diddy Combs, someone who had millions of fans and may still have millions of fans. People that loved his music, people that loved other ventures he was involved with, whether it was his television program, he had restaurants, his clothing line. He had his tentacles all over pop culture and all over the world of hip-hop. And people loved him. People wanted to be near him. Well, those millions of fans don't really matter at this point because the 12 most important people are sitting in a jury box. And they will be the ones who will decide what the rest of his life will be like. Those are the 12 who will decide and tell us the truth about what happened in this case. And it won't be an easy decision for them. Not an easy case. This isn't cut and dry. This isn't a classic federal prosecution that we're used to, which are cases usually involving confessions, cooperating witnesses, videos, audio tapes, all, clear-cut evidence over the top. That's how the feds usually work. This case, they're taking a little bit of a risk. First, going after someone like Diddy Combs, who can put up a defense, and number two, kind of stretching the intent of the RICO statute, trying to paint Sean Diddy Combs as someone who's running a criminal enterprise versus someone who's running a business, a legitimate business, involved in all the things that I've already mentioned. So for these 12 folks who have to figure this case out, it's really about consent or crime. What was going on in these freak-offs and hotel nights? Were they consensual activities? Yeah, they're, a little bit out there, not to everyone's taste. But if they are, in fact, consensual, consenting adults can do pretty much anything that consenting adults want to do sexually with one another and others. That's the issue here. That's why, and also want to let you know, by the way, when it comes to the issue of consent or a crime, what was going on in these freak-offs, we are going to have a very insightful look at these freak-offs this hour. I'm going to be speaking with one of the exotic dancers who was hired by Cassie and Diddy and was there with them, not once, not twice, but a whole bunch of times. We'll hear the details of what it was all about, and we'll get his take coming up. Excuse me. In the meantime, today, big day for prosecutors. Closing arguments. You've got to prove your case. You've got to marshal the evidence. Like, the evidence is out there, but you've got to take it, and you've got to give the jury a roadmap to conviction. Otherwise, you lose the case. You've got to provide the jury with everything they need inside that jury room to come out and say, we are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Sean Diddy Combs is a criminal running a criminal enterprise. And joining us to talk about all the latest in New York, Court TV legal correspondent Kelly Craft live outside that federal courthouse in New York City. All right. Let's start here tonight, Kelly. What about the scene outside the courthouse? I haven't been there. You have been. What can you tell us?
Well, hey there, Vinnie. Well, today it was more chaotic than usual, even going back to the first day of this case when we were here. It was still busy, but today, just because of all the attention surrounding this case, a lot of chaos outside the federal courthouse as well as inside, because at one point the judge even closed the courtroom from people getting in and out. This is the actual courtroom where the trial is taking place because too many people started going in and out. You're taking a look at some of the footage from outside. So this morning, a lot of people line up in hopes of getting a seat inside that actual courtroom. A lot of media outlets and people hire line sitters that pack up and sit here since 12 o'clock in the morning, hoping to get a seat inside the courtroom. But then when they start taking the names around 7 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, a lot of people this morning started rushing to the front, so getting in front of a lot of the other people. And then, of course, it just becomes chaos. So very, very important for a lot of people who want to get a glimpse at Sean Diddy Combs inside that courtroom. His family and friends, a lot of his supporters made their way into the courthouse today. We saw his daughters arrive a little bit later this morning. They were wearing their matching outfits. And of course, when they pull up in front of the courthouse, a big black van brings them in front, and then everyone gathers because they want to get a glimpse of the children making their way into the courthouse. So just a pretty chaotic scene, Vinnie, to say the least.
A chaotic scene in a chaotic city, so it makes sense.
Yes.
Let's talk about the government's closing argument here relative to racketeering, RICO, running this criminal enterprise. What did we hear from the government today?
Well, the government really was very clear, very crisp in its delivery, just really laying out all of the evidence that came forth in this trial, saying how they satisfied all of the elements and the charges in this case. I know we have some full screens made that we can put up for you in regard to what some of their argument was during the trial. They spent a significant amount of time going through all of the charges. For instance, saying that Combs was a very powerful man, but he became more powerful and more dangerous because of the support of his inner circle and his businesses, the enterprise. The defendant was at the top of this enterprise. Remember, it's his kingdom. Everyone was there to serve him. So that was really important, because what the prosecutors did, Vinnie, is they talked about Christina Coram as well as D-Rock, and how this was not just Sean Combs. It was all of his people that worked for him. And it didn't have to be the same people all of the time. That's what the prosecutor said. It could have been this person came in and out of his life, this person came in and out of his life, but all of them worked together and knew their number one job was to say yes to Sean Diddy Combs.
And were there any arguments there about how much of his enterprise was about the freak-offs and this other alleged criminal activity versus running restaurants, running clothing lines, running a record label, getting involved in television programs? Was there any discussion or argument about that?
Vinnie, everything was tied to the freak-offs, the abuse tied to the freak-offs, the force, the power, the control. So talking about how all of that is just puts into this section of sex trafficking, as well as obstruction of justice, as well as forced labor. That was really the focus. We didn't really hear much about these other outside enterprises, the outside businesses that you're referring to. It was just more him using money, using his companies to get what he wanted and get his trusted advisors to do things like get drugs for the girls so they then could perform in these freak-offs. And everyone knew that harm would come to them if they didn't do what he said.
Okay, how about sex trafficking? How much did they focus on that, and what did they have to say?
One of the things that was interesting was when the federal prosecutors used a lot of defense counsel's own words in their opening statements, saying that, yeah, it may look like some of the girls, for instance, the woman going by the name of Jane, was into some of these hotel nights. In fact, the federal prosecutor said today defense counsel even played a very extensive portion of one of the videos showing that Jane was extremely super into one of these hotel nights. And what did she say? She said, well, that's because she was super, super high, because Sean Combs had introduced her to a new drug called Marlee, and that's why she appeared like she was really, really into it, although she was not, because the prosecutor said she had said to Sean, per her testimony and text messages, that I no longer want to take part in these hotel nights. I believe we have a full screen we can put up for you in regard to some more of the argument that the prosecutor was making in her closing argument today. And she was talking about Jane, she was talking about Mia, she was talking about Cassie Ventura. But these are actually in regard to the charges. So he's accused of paying for escorts to travel for sex with his girlfriends. That was talked a lot about, from New York to LA, from LA to Turks and Caicos, also Atlanta to Florida and LA. So just talking about that transporting across straight lines and getting everyone involved to make sure these hotel room nights were set up. So Combs allegedly coerced Jane into sex trafficking 3 times. On 9/2000, this is September of 2023, Jane lured to New York, then coerced into a hotel night. In October of 2023, a sobriety party date. In June of 2024, Combs called an escort after having a beating rampage in Jane's home, which Combs paid for. So, Vinnie, really what the prosecutor was doing here, she said there were so many instances that meet all of these elements, but she would focus on things like, here are 3 of them. And she did this for every single charge, really making it clear to the jurors that they have satisfied and they have all this evidence for them to find Combs guilty of every single charge.
And finally, I think the image that changed everything for Diddy, and I think changed a lot of people's perception of him, the Cassie Hotel video. What did the prosecution say about that during their closing argument?
Vinnie, they spent a lot of time on that as well, playing all of the different angles that we have of that video, showing how Cassie was there and then she left. So she was at a freak off inside a hotel room. She then left, and you can see it there. Sean comes after her in a towel, viciously beats her, then begins dragging her by the hair to go back to the room. Then eventually he sees her, he comes back and sees her, because he didn't take her all the way back to the room. He sees her on the telephone, and then he comes over again, breaks the vase. They played that for the jury as well today, even though they've seen it before, but wanted to make that clear, showing this is sex trafficking, this is force, this is coercion. And they illustrated it by saying, imagine you meet someone, he's bigger than you, he's stronger than you, you're in love with him, he's your boss, and you begin to realize you can never say no to them. No to Sean Combs, and that's exactly what Cassie and Jane felt like. That's what the federal prosecutor said in the closing.
Kelly Craft in New York, long day today, another long day tomorrow, and then the jury will get the case. Appreciate it, and we will speak again. Thanks so much. All right, let's bring in some guests. Joined on the phone by former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani, also president of the West Coast Trial Lawyers. Also, extra TV correspondent Mona Kozar Abdi is with us as well. Great to have you both here. Mona, let me begin with you. Your thoughts about the picture that's being painted of Diddy. And to me, it really comes down to this idea of, is this just consensual behavior that is, beyond, or is this criminal behavior that is part of a criminal enterprise? What do you think the picture that's being painted is here?
Yeah, that's the big looming question. I mean, if you're the defense, then you're going to say, actually, this is just a relationship. This is domestic violence, and that these were two people that maybe had a non-conventional or unconventional sex life. But what I thought was interesting, and Kelly mentioned this too, is that today during closing arguments, the prosecution focused a lot on establishing this enterprise, right? To show that this wasn't just a man who we knew as a music mogul, just a mogul in general, in business, fashion, in so many lanes. He had a production company, for example. And we knew him as this big superstar, but they're saying that this wasn't just your normal celebrity entourage, that this was a criminal enterprise. And at the top was Diddy, the boss. And what they did that I thought was very smart, before I break it down, is that the RICO is usually associated with the mob and the mafia. And the assistant U.S. attorney today acknowledged that. She told the jury that, yeah, you may have heard RICO come up when talking about the mob and the mafia, but I want to let you know that this is not just the only definition. And then she went on to use the same terms, for example, the same rankings that maybe you might hear in relation to the mafia. So, for example, she said Diddy is the boss. Then he had his loyal lieutenants, Christina Quorum, his chief of staff, and then these bodyguards that we've heard so much about, Uncle Pauly, Roger Bonds, D-Rock, for example, that we've heard time and time again, but they've never laid out this kind of hierarchy that they did today. And then they said at the bottom were the foot soldiers, right? These army of assistants that he had. And a bulk of the testimony that we've heard throughout this trial was from the assistants. And so they really try to hone in on that. And they actually were weaving in the sex trafficking counts within painting the larger RICO picture. But Vinnie, as you mentioned, this is an uphill battle for the prosecution, because they didn't focus so much on his legitimate businesses, right? He's a music executive, the Bad Boy Records, or Revolt Productions, or all of the businesses that made up Combs Enterprise. And the prosecution said, when we say Combs Enterprise, we're not talking about Combs Enterprises, which is actually just a bunch of his companies under that umbrella. But I don't know if they will be able to separate that. And I think that the defense will focus a lot on the fact that this man was a businessman, and that this was something that he did on his personal time, on his free time.
Yeah. And Nima, you know, the difference, and this is a big difference when you talk about the mob and RICO, is that the purpose of the criminal enterprise is to generate income illegally. Like, the enterprise is set up to break the law and derive a benefit from it. In this case, he is creating a criminal enterprise to spend money. Like, it's different, isn't it? Isn't there a huge difference between the mob and the enterprise of Diddy Combs in terms of what the true meaning of RICO is?
Well, Vinnie, there is a huge difference. And when RICO was first enacted in the 1970s, it was used for the mob. And then it was later used for street kings and drug cartels. But the reason former prosecutors and current prosecutors like me love RICO, because it is a very broad statute. It brings in a lot of people, brings a lot of evidence into a case. And this is why defense lawyers hate it, and they think it's prosecutorial overreach. But here's the important thing. It doesn't have to be the sole purpose of the criminal enterprise. It just has to be a purpose. And this case, Vinnie, is going to come down entirely to RICO. I think prostitution is a gimme. If that's all Diddy is convicted of, this is going to be the most expensive prostitution trial this country has ever had, right? It's like convicting Karen Reed of a DUI. So, and we know that sex trafficking is shaky. That is why it's not just important what Christy Slavic said today, the assistant U.S. attorney, but when she said it. She started with RICO. And of the predicate acts, she started with drug trafficking. Why, Vinnie? Because that's the most readily provable offense. And she started with the drugs that were found in Diddy's homes when they were raided. And then she moved to the other RICO predicates, really in order of what she thought the government had proven, right? She talked about the kidnapping, right? We all saw the video, right, of Diddy dragging Cassie. Then we talked about Capricorn Clark, right, her being taken day after day to an office building, having to take lie detector tests, and the bribery, right, that $100,000. You know, and then she started working her way down, we talked about prostitution, to the more difficult RICO predicates, forced labor, not as strong, and ultimately sex trafficking. Now, sex trafficking, a much tougher argument. So she talked about the violence, of course, and everything else that shows coercion, force, control, the drugs, the finances, right? I'm not going to pay your rent. You're going to be homeless. The lies. And importantly, holding the sex tapes, the videos over the victims' heads, Cassie and Jane. And one thing that was very important, Vinnie, is the discussion of Mia. There was very little discussion of Mia. That leads me to believe that the prosecution and maybe some of the jurors didn't find her to be credible. So it's fascinating that they really sort of marginalized her during today's closing argument, likely because of the inconsistencies in her interviews with law enforcement and the inconsistencies in her interviews with prosecutors. She didn't bring up the sexual assault. So how they handled her, I think, was important today. And of course, they closed like all prosecutors do. They said, hold him accountable. Don't let him get away with it. Thought it was a good closing, but we'll see how Mark Ignifilo does tomorrow for the defense.
All right, big thank you to Nima Rahmani and Mona Kozar Abdi. Really appreciate it. When we come back, joining us live, one of the witnesses in the case, an exotic dancer who was part of the freak-offs with Cassie and Diddy. He's known as the Punisher. You will meet him and you will get extreme details tonight as to what exactly was happening in these freak-offs that are the focal point of this entire trial. Plus, coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan investigates the tragic death of 13-year-old Madeline Soto, and now her alleged killer set to go on trial next month, accused of sexually abusing her for years and recording it on his phone. Did Stephen Stearns confess? Tonight, we investigate.
I was working as a male exotic dancer, stage name Punisher. When I arrived at the hotel, I was greeted at the door by Ms. Ventura. She had on a bathrobe that appeared that she had nothing on underneath, and I think she had on a wig. She explained to me that her and her husband liked to create a sexy scene that consisted of me and her mutually applying baby oil, applying it to ourselves and to possibly each other, and try to create a sexy environment that her husband would eventually come out to watch. She handed me a stack of money. It was $800.
That's testimony straight from the transcripts of the Diddy trial, and that is one of the people who was hired by Cassie and Diddy to take part in one of these freak-offs. And that man is joining us now. His name is Reyes, an exotic dancer who goes by the stage name of The Punisher, recently testified in the case. He's also the author of In Search of Freezer Meat. I don't know if I want to get into the details of the title of the book, Sheree, but I appreciate it. And folks can check that out. I know it's selling very well these days. Let me ask you, Sheree, let's start first with the Punisher nickname. There's been a lot of talk about that. Can you just set the record straight as to where you got that nickname?
Yeah, the nickname is not associated with any sexual acts or that type of environment. It's actually a nickname from playing basketball in the New York City area. A place called The Cage. If you were a regular at the court, you earned a nickname. And that was something I was doing previous to dancing, so I kind of just carried it over to my dancing.
Perfect. My basketball nickname was Hitman, and it has nothing to do with what I do after I leave the studio. Okay, that's great. Let's start. How do you first get connected to Cassie and Diddy?
So at the time, I was just using Google for like leads for private parties, like bachelorette parties and birthday parties. So if you did a Google search for male dancers in the New York City area, you would find my website, and I was taking the calls directly. So it was just like a standard party booking where I just got a call. At the time, Ms. Ventura introduced herself as Janet and said that it was her birthday, and her husband said that she can hire an entertainer. And I was under the impression that I was showing up for a small gathering of her girlfriends, and they wanted a little striptease to entertain her for her birthday.
Okay, so you show up. First of all, where do you show up and what happens? Who greets you and how do you begin the evening?
Yeah, so, the normal scenario with booking the party is you get a location and a time. So the location I was given was Trump International Hotel, which is Central Park West. And I was told the time kind of varied. We started maybe 12, 12:30. There was some rearranging the time, but we kind of set a concrete timestamp of 3 a.m. So I'm showing up expecting to just come to a gathering of women, normal party atmosphere I've done literally thousands of times. But in this occasion, you know, I was greeted at the door by Miss Ventura in just a bathrobe. And it was clear indication that she was nude under. And I kind of knew from just the immediate initial walking into the door that this wasn't going to be like a typical birthday party.
Okay, so she opens the door by herself, robe, nothing underneath. So is there a conversation about what the evening is going to entail? Does she lay out what her expectations would be?
Yes. So coming in, I'm still, obviously, we walk in, it's a suite. So we walk into the living room area, and I can tell that there's no guests there. So, but I just asked the question anyway. We stopped in front of a bathroom, and I said, hey, do you want me to change here? And I'm talking about my outfit to dance. And she immediately explained to me, hey, look, I'm not interested in you dancing. And she explained to me that her and her husband like to create a sexy scene. So the furniture in the living room were all covered in sheets. In the proximity of the sofa and a chair, you can see that there were bowls of warm water with bottles of baby oil in it. And she explained that we were going to create this scene where I was going to put baby oil on myself. She was going to do the same. We may oil each other, and eventually her husband would come out and watch at some point. And I was specifically instructed that when her husband came out to not look at him, don't talk to him, try my best to not acknowledge him. We're supposed to act like he's not even present.
Now, did you recognize Cassie when you got there and you saw her?
I did not. Like, you know, her face looked familiar, but I couldn't make it out. She was wearing a wig at the time, and my association with Cassie was she had this real prominent, like, shaved hairdo. So without that cue, I did not realize who she was.
Now, you realize that the people who hired you had some money, right? This was a nice place that you were at?
Yeah, so, you know, doing parties over the years, you get an understanding of which hotels are very high end. So the minute that I heard Trump International, that was kind of a cue that this was going to be a high profile party.
Okay, so she's laying out that we're going to do this baby oil thing. Does she instruct you to take off your clothes? Does she take off her clothes? How do you get to that next step? We're like, okay, we're going to do a scene, right? So how does it start? And and let me ask you one other thing. Are you concerned that there's going to be someone walking in and you don't know who or when this person is going to walk in to this room?
Yeah, so this scenario for me, it was very nuanced. It wasn't something typical. So I was instructed when I asked to change I had a choice of just coming out of my underwear or a towel. So I chose a towel. And as soon as I came out, it was just instructions that we were going to sit adjacent from each other and start this. Now, even being in this type of business for a long period of time, the idea of having, you know, close proximity sexual situations with a partnered woman was something I wasn't experienced. So there was a scenario, just a thought process in the back of my mind, like, hey, is this going to be okay? Will the husband get jealous? Will this create a scenario of uncomfortability? So I was worried about that going into the situation. So
you sit down on the couches covered in sheets. At this point, who is doing what? And remember, we're on regular television. I know you understand that, but is there physical contact between you with the baby oil, and are you naked?
Yeah, so obviously she starts out in a robe, I start out in a towel, and it does escalate to us being nude. And so I'm putting the baby oil on myself individually. She's doing the same. At some point, we start doing it to each other in terms of like a mutual massage. And then there is mimicking of self-pleasuring, right? Because we're trying to create this scene. And it did feel like acting, right? It felt like, I always think about those kind of like grade B cable movies where they have the sexy scenes, and so it seemed like corny acting, right? But, you know, I'm in there trying to create the scene. Obviously, I was initially paid 4 times the amount I asked for. So in terms of me, I thought it was a workable scenario in terms of what I was being paid in the environment. So I was trying to make it work. So it didn't escalate to anything past that, but that's all the expectation that I understood at that time.
So you were play acting. Now, you say you're doing a scene. I'm wondering, are you looking around to see if there are cameras anywhere?
So the room was dark. Everything was they had these little electric candles, so that pretty much controlled the light. So my assumption of it was it was too dark to film, so I didn't probe to see if anything like that was going on. And then the truth of the matter, man, the situation was so overwhelming at that moment, you know, walking into this expecting to do something I've done 1,000 times, which is a little striptease, and now I'm in this situation. My mind was over processing so many things that thinking about a camera was really the furthest thing from my mind.
And you said 4 times the usual amount. So how much are you being paid for this?
Well, so a striptease is $200, right? So when I walked in, prior to me changing, she handed me a stack of money, and at that time it was $800. I counted it in the bathroom. So again, knowing that amount of money, expecting $200, and I'm like, okay, all I have to do is rub oil on her and rub oil on myself. It seemed like a workable scenario. The situation of the husband eventually coming into the room, again, that created some concern. But the concern for me at that point was more of maybe him getting jealous of me interacting with his wife.
All right, we're going to take a short break, folks. When we come back, I'm going to ask Sheree about Diddy. When does Diddy enter the room? Does he recognize him? What happens next as we continue our coverage of the sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs? Welcome back. We're in the middle of learning the intimate details of what was happening in one of Diddy's freak-offs with Cassie and a exotic dancer known as the Punisher, but his real name is Reyes, and he's with us right now. Sheree, thanks so much for sticking around. Okay, so when we left off, right, you were on the couch, naked, covered in baby oil, play acting with Cassie. At what point do you realize that her partner, husband, however she referred to him, enters the room?
I want to say it was about maybe somewhere between 7 to 10 minutes into the scene, and I could see from my peripheral vision a man walk into the room, and I obviously I have my own concerns, so I am paying attention to it. So I can clearly see that he enters the room. The room is set up where he's quite a distance. We're on one far side of the room on the couches, and then on the opposite side of the room, there was a table and chair set up. So he walked in and he sat there, but coming in, I can pick up the fact that he was actually nude, and I could not see his face because he was wearing what I believe is called a hijab. It's what the Muslim women wear, where their faces are completely covered and you can only see their eyes. So he entered the room that way and sat at a table and chair on the far side of the room.
Now, during all of this, is there any conversation between you and Diddy or you and Cassie? And if so, what's the nature? Like, what is being said?
So the conversation with me and Cassie was, because as I entered the room, I only spoke to her. So like I said earlier, she explained to me what she wanted to create with the scene. And while we were in the acting mode, it wasn't really any conversation between me and her, other than us playing our roles. And as I was not supposed to acknowledge Mr. Combs, he didn't acknowledge and speak to me in any way. He would give subtle directions to Miss Ventura in regards to more of lighting situations. The room was candlelit, it was kind of dim, so he would give instructions in terms of move the candles a little bit more, position your body this way. Even if it was something for me to do, he would ask her to ask me, have him move to the left. So it was a very diligent, deliberate effort to avoid any interactions with me directly.
So this is the first time, right? And there are return engagements where you get involved again. How many times did they call you back to engage in this freak-off stuff?
Yeah, so I honestly don't have an exact number. So I've always estimated from 8 to 12 times. And this also went on over a period of 2.5 years. It was from the fall of 2012 to spring of 2015.
And in that first engagement, was there any sexual contact, sexual intercourse?
No, there wasn't. It stayed strictly just a scene/massage. At some point, maybe 20 to 25 minutes into the act, Mr. Combs got up and walked out of the room, and Miss Ventura followed him. She came back almost immediately and just said, "Hey, that was great. That was exactly what we were looking for. Thank you. We can be done now." But then, oddly, she offered me the option of, "Do you want to finish?" Which I understood meaning to orgasm. Which I actually declined. I was already uncomfortable with the situation. And I really just tried to stay professional and said, look, it's not about my individual pleasure. I'm here to make this scene for you guys. If you're happy, I'm happy. So it's unnecessary. And she just said, thank you. And then handed me an additional stack of money, which ended up being another $1,200. So it was a $2,000.
$2,000. Okay, so there's 8 to 10 more times, or 8 to 12 times over the course of 2.5 years. Did the nature of the scenes you were playing change?
Just an escalation to actual sex, but everything stayed very routine and standard. It was always a scenario where it started with baby oil massage, mutual, with some sort of act of self-pleasuring that then would escalate to sexual acts of oral or maybe penetrative sex.
And Diddy never partakes in it, right? He's taking care of himself?
Yeah, he never partakes. He's always, for the most part, a great distance away. And almost all of his interactions was just directions in terms of visual cues, body positioning, a suggestion of maybe more oil. And if there was further suggestions, I didn't hear them because there was a routine. If they needed to have a conversation, he would stand up at times and just walk out of the room. And Ms. Ventura would take that as a cue, leave the room with him. They would have a brief conversation, be gone for a period of time, and then she would return and we would resume. And sometimes with her resuming, she would give me instructions or the act or something would change. But I don't know if that was directly from him or her. But I know all of their communications were outside of an environment for me to see or hear. So I can't give you the real structure or means of where the directions came from.
And at any point, did you get the feeling that what was taking place was non-consensual?
That I did not. I always felt like this was I honestly, in the moment, it just felt like this was a couple that were trying to explore certain kinks and fetishes. And I was just somebody there to try to provide the fantasy or help them create the fantasy. My interactions with Miss Ventura prior to the sessions was always very cordial and positive, and it was a good vibe and environment. And even after the fact, when she would come to initially pay me when the situation was over, everything seemed like she was in a good-natured, good headspace, and I didn't get any cues that there was possibly distress or some type of thing she was going through that might have been a negative experience.
All right, Sheree's going to stay with us. When we come back, I'm going to ask him, when does he find out that this is actually Sean Diddy Combs and Cassie Ventura? And what's his reaction to finding that out? Plus, coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan investigates the sexual abuse and murder of 13-year-old Madeline Soto. Her accused abuser, her mom's boyfriend, Stephen Stearns, is about to go on trial. But where is Madeline's mother, Jen Soto? Tonight, we investigate.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan investigates. Coming up next, only on Court TV.
These are the cases that captivated the world.
Couldn't keep my life straight.
They were killed by their own children.
That challenged the legal system and ourselves. Court TV, Legendary Trials.
Welcome back. We're continuing our interview with one of the crucial witnesses in the case against Diddy Combs. His name is Reyes. He's an exotic dancer, also known as the Punisher. Testified in the trial, also has a book out called In Search of Freezer Meat, which has both humorous and has helpful information, especially for men, in that book, and it's selling very well. Let me ask you, Sheree, at what point, how and when did you realize that these this couple was actually Diddy and Cassie Ventura?
Yeah, so embarrassingly, man, this whole situation went on a duration of, like I said earlier, 2.5 years. And it probably was about a year to 15 months in. And I still had no clue who they were. And just when I would meet up with them, we would be in these large hotel suites. And sometimes I could show up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then our actual interactions wouldn't go on to hours later. So one specific day, they put me in an extra room in the suite, and to kill time, I decided to watch TV. And this specific hotel had a welcome message. So when I cut the TV on, the screen said Essex House would like to welcome Mr. Sean Combs. And that was literally how I found out. I just cut on the TV, I saw his name, and when I tell you, it was just like a holy crap moment.
Yeah.
I was. And it was even more embarrassing was, at the time, I followed him on social media. So I would literally see him from time to time on my phone, do posts and stuff like that, and I had no idea that's who I was interacting with.
So when you find out, the behavior still continues. Does it change anything for you? Are you more concerned? Do you feel more comfortable? What's going through your mind?
Yeah, so for me, it actually created more anxiety. And, again, it's rumors, but, me growing up, there was always a rumor in terms of Mr. Combs' sexuality. And obviously nothing is confirmed and stuff, but this was something that I was aware of. So it was already a high anxiety space for me, just trying to perform and being in this sexual environment. But I think it did add an element of worry of, okay, could there be an expectation of more type of interactions, just more than me and Miss Ventura? So that was a concern. And then it's just the anxiety now, because I understand that I'm in a room with a mega star, and this is a very high profile person. And it just creates a whole bunch of different elements of if I always worried about if things escalated to something negative, how do I handle it? How do I communicate? How do I go about it? And I was a fan of Mr. Combs, right? So it's just a whole bunch of different elements for me to consider in terms of how to manage this situation. And it all just ended up being an extremely high place of anxiety for me.
And finally, we only have about 20 seconds left here, but your reaction to being called as a witness for the prosecution in all this?
That was just crazy to me. I didn't think my role in it was significant as it was. So to then, all these years later, being pushed into this scenario on a national stage to kind of decide this man's future and livelihood was just a very, very intimidating, difficult space to be in. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. The pressure and the stress is immense.
I can't imagine, but I appreciate you coming on and telling your story, Sheree. Very insightful, and hope everything turns out well for you. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, wow. Let's take a look at our screens right now because we have a missing child who needs your help. Marlee Antoinette Reyes, missing from El Paso, 14 years old. Pick up the phone. The numbers are on the screen. Let's see if we can get Marlee to a safe place tonight. Don't go anywhere. We have another hour of live true crime. Vinnie Politan Investigates is next. In the meantime, please don't forget to hug the kids.